So, one topic I've seen brought up in a lot of my videos is the types of weapons and gear we'll be seeing in the next Mass Effect game, as well as the combat system. So let's get right into it and speculate what weaponry, classes and abilities and projectiles could be returning in the next Mass Effect game.
Lockhart QT.
The types of gear, gadgets and weaponry we'll see in the next game, whether it be Mass Effect 4, 5, Andromeda 2, depends on when the next game is set. Now I've already talked about the timeline of the next game at length. If you want to check my channel, I've got various videos covering the subject. But if the game is set shortly after Mass Effect 3's ending, then we'll be seeing lots of the Milky Way, basically Mass Effect 3 era weaponry, some of the more Milky Way weapons that were then brought into Andromeda as well. But if the game is set in the far-flung future, potentially either in the Milky Way or Andromeda, then we could be seeing all types of brand new weaponry. This also includes the fact that potentially we could be seeing new alien races and their respective weapon classes. But there's still the possibility that this new game will be set in Andromeda's timeline, and if this is the case, then we'll most likely see the Milky Way weapons brought over to Andromeda, as well as Angaran and Ket weaponry and gadgets, abilities, etc. If the game is set shortly after Mass Effect 3 though, I think that we'll see some fan favourites and familiar weapons brought back, such as the N7 Lancer and the M15 Vindicator. Personally, I'd love to see the sort of special requisition weapons come back, you know, the N7 weapons and the gold weapons and the unlockable weapons from Mass Effect 2 and 3. I think the more outlandish ones, like I think there's one that's like a mini nuke, I think those sort of things would be really cool as well. If we see a game set in Andromeda's galaxy, however, then we could instead see the return of weapons such as the Helios cluster weapons or the beam rifle-esque weaponry that was essentially brought in by the Remnant. I'd also love to see the return of melee weapons such as the Asari swords and the blades, and obviously the Omni tool as well, and like I said earlier, the more outlandish weapons such as the nuke launcher from ME2 and ME3. Personally, I'd also love to see the return of a combat system like Andromeda's, but in a more linear, story-based level similar to the original trilogy, because I know Andromeda gets a lot of flack, but personally I think Andromeda's combat was brilliant. In Andromeda, I love the fact that we could switch abilities on the fly and basically act as a jack of all trades, as it allowed us to mix and match on the fly whilst allocating skill points to where you want to. And like I said, I know the game gets a lot of well-deserved flack and criticism from the fanbase, which is, again, very well-deserved. But personally, I'd love to see a return to Mass Effect Andromeda's combat loop, as well as, like I said earlier, bringing in more of the linear level design. And finally, alongside fan favourite weaponry, as I'd love to see the return of the jet boosters. This is a personal thing, but I actually loved them in Andromeda. These allowed us to pull off combos and almost slam dunking enemies, as well as for traversal. Plus, bioware could develop new areas that feature in platforming elements, sort of similar to how they did it in some. Basically, they touched on this in Andromeda. They didn't really get carried away with it, but I just think that, you know, having platforming elements would really vary up the gameplay. And finally, in terms of classes, I'd like to see some new ones alongside classes returning, such as, you know, Tech, Biotic, Soldier, and other returning abilities from the original trilogy and Andromeda, whilst also fine-tuning them to perhaps be split up into more focused classes and maybe combining a few classes as well. But I'd also we basically need to see abilities focusing on DPS, healing, projectile, shielding, and that sort of thing really, and producing cover for enemies. I think producing cover on the fly and shielding and healing your other squad mates is going to be vital in the next game going forward, and I just can't wait to see what BioWare do in terms of new weaponry, bringing back fan favourites, as well as the combat in general. Anyway guys, that's just been a short video on what weapons, classes and abilities we'll see in the next Mass Effect game. Again, this is purely speculation at this point, as we don't really have a lot of information to go off of, but if you want more Mass Effect videos, don't forget to stay subscribed to the channel, and I'll see you guys in the next one. Bye.